The 2024 edition of the WWE Draft has come and gone, and as always, there were winners, there were losers. And before we get into actually picking who won this draft, which I think is a pretty easy decision, let's talk about the draft itself, because I know a lot of people a little underwhelmed, a little disappointed. This was not the most memorable draft by any means in WWE history, because we know, like from the start, they were really pushing the fact that this was about preserving your own roster, which I don't love that idea, but I understand why they do it, I guess. If it is a full roster draft, you're not just drafting new people. You're also drafting people who are already on your brand, which can be a little confusing in the concept of the draft itself, I guess, throughout the years. But still, that was clearly the focus here. They were making it about preservation and getting the people back that you wanted on the roster. And we saw that, basically from the start of night one. That was really what it was all about. Keeping talent more so than it was bringing over new talent, even though, keep in mind, there were still, from a numbers perspective, a lot of people who moved, but a lot of those were kind of part of the factions, tag team kind of scenario. But you didn't get a lot of those huge main event stars moving or anything like that, which you're kind of used to seeing in times over the years in the draft. And I think that's what made this one kind of forgettable. But we'll see, because you also have the NXT call-ups and all that who could, wind up being the big ones in the future and all of that. But let's talk about who exactly maybe won this draft. And I think, as always, there's one brand in particular that may have a little bit of an unfair advantage because of the amount of TV that they have to produce each week. But I don't think I'm giving you much of a spoiler as to who I'm going to pick that won this draft. But let's look at this. So Raw, again, it was all about getting the people back that they really needed to get back. And you got to start with your challenger for the championship at Backlash. That is Jey Uso. Seth Rollins back, Drew McIntyre, CM Punk, all those guys, like those are your big kind of top stars on the brand. Women's wise, you get Liv Morgan staying there. You get the Judgment Day staying there from a faction standpoint, which, you had some stuff with Liv and Dominic and all that. But you also get a lot of interesting, kind of people that are joining the mix here, whether it is, two of the NXT call-ups, Kiana James and Valkyria, or, Dijak's also joining too, right? So some of those people who were drafted as part of the supplemental draft, I'm curious to see how they use them moving forward. New Catch Republic comes over from a tag team standpoint. And again, you're able to stay with the Alpha Academy. You're able to keep Imperium. You guys know it was one of my picks. I thought maybe we'd see Imperium, Gunther, and Ludwig Kaiser go to SmackDown. And I thought LA Knight may be the one that jumped to Raw if you had some of those bigger stars move. That just didn't happen in this draft. So, hey, big win for Raw, keeping a lot of these talents. And then, you bring over the LWO, which I, thank goodness, in my opinion, you guys know my thoughts on this, I'm glad they finally split the LWO and Legado del Fantasma. I thought that was the right move to do that, because that feud had just been going on for a while now. So they split them. Then you have kind of a couple people added to the mix here who you've not really seen on Raw a lot, and that is, of course, Braun Strowman making his return. So you get kind of a former main event talent making his return back. So that's one of maybe the more significant moves you saw in this draft. And then Ilja Dragunov joining the mix, and I think having him on the same brand as Gunther, that's a nice thing to have moving forward. So I thought overall pretty good stuff from Raw. Again, it seemed like the bigger focus was them just sort of preserving the roster and keeping what they already had in place, more so than bringing over any huge new talent other than, again, the NXT call-ups and all that, which really were kind of the main theme of this draft. When you think about the people who move brands, it was more about the NXT people than it was anything else. So, all right, SmackDown. So if we look at where things are with the SmackDown brand, again, numbers-wise, there's not as many, and I think that, again, sometimes puts SmackDown at a disadvantage in terms of picking your winners and losers of the draft, but same thing. I mean, it was really about looking at the people that they got back, and LA Knight, Randy Orton, Bianca, Jade, Kevin Owens, Tiffany Stratton, AJ Styles. Like, you just keep going down the line, right? The Bloodline, I mean, obviously that's a given. I mean, that could wind up being the biggest pick of the draft, given the where we're going with this Bloodline story and all that. But you also had some interesting ones here, where you bring over Shinsuke Nakamura. You look at Carmelo Hayes. Obviously, that was a big addition. Gets a match with Cody on night one of that. So, and then, a couple of the NXT call-ups as well. You got a Blair Davenport joining the mix. Giovanni Vinci comes over by himself now. That was what we were a little bit maybe afraid of for Vinci after the whole split with Imperium. So now he's on SmackDown and has to kind of reinvent himself. But I think it's pretty clear that when you just look at kind of the way this draft unfolded, Raw loaded up, and it was really, like we said, a matter of really bringing a lot of people back that were already on the brand, but it was also adding a Strowman, adding a Dragunov, adding some of those NXT call-ups that we mentioned, especially on the women's side. And so, yeah, like when you compare it to what SmackDown got out of this, it's kind of staying the same for SmackDown here. Of course, we know champions also on each brand, so Cody's here on SmackDown, Priest on Raw, and the other ones, Sami Zayn still on Raw, Logan Paul, SmackDown. So, you kind of keep going from that perspective, and you got the women's champions too, Becky on Raw, Bayley on SmackDown. But I think when you just look at, SmackDown versus where Raw's at right now, there's just much more star power on Raw, which, as we said, would make sense if WWE is really loading up for the move to Netflix and all that. You want to put as many stars on that brand as you can, which is why we thought, hey, maybe there's a chance the Bloodline goes to Raw. That didn't happen. So I'm curious to see how and if they do shake up these rosters a little bit. I mean, this was not really a huge shakeup. Like I said, numbers-wise, yes, there was movement, quite a few moves that were made, and when you jumbled like Damage Control and those kind of people together, like the numbers made sense. I don't know if I mentioned Damage Control on Raw, but they're also there too. So it's like, man, Raw, if you just look at this roster, I think compared to what you got on SmackDown, there's a clear difference, but that's where having your champion in Cody Rhodes helps on SmackDown because he can kind of be the face of the brand. And then, of course, the Bloodline story, it's kind of a very similar thing, in my opinion, because you just didn't get a lot of new moves necessarily on the SmackDown side. You did add, let's say in the women's side, you added a Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell and such. So, but like they're just, Chelsea Green, Piper Niven, so you moved over some of those women's tag teams. But other than that, I'm curious to see how things proceed moving forward on SmackDown. It gives you some options for some fresh storylines, but I think it's very clear just from a star power perspective, clearly more on Raw, but Raw is 3 hours versus SmackDown with 2 hours. You've got Cody on SmackDown, you got the Bloodline there, as we said, and you've got a lot of, obviously good talent with Bianca and Jade, who are probably going to become the women's tag team champions, which makes sense why they would go ahead and move Damage Control to Raw, because Asuka and Kairi Sane will go there after they lose those championships. And so, you've still got LA Knight, you've got Styles, guys like that. So, look, I think Raw is the winner of this year's 2024 WWE Draft. I just think, sometimes it's easy to pick Raw because they have more picks. But in this instance, I just think that it was probably a better overall setup for Raw now moving forward. Now, also, you got to keep in mind, though, something to think about. I mean, CM Punk and Drew McIntyre are both injured right now. So if we look at the Raw roster and we're like, all right, Raw's your winner. Well, I mean, that's two guys who are kind of out of the mix as for now, but they're still continuing their feud, right? So we've still got, injury situations with both of these guys, but they're going to use them just as we've seen them use Punk. And we don't know exactly how long McIntyre's out. So I think that's something that's worth noting here. But I do think still, though, when you look at just kind of the potential storyline options in the short term, I think Raw, there's a lot of intriguing things here. But again, I don't want to just discount completely SmackDown, even with this roster. I feel like on SmackDown, you've got a lot of those, I don't know, like you've still got a lot of those kind of acts that are in the mid-card, maybe lower mid-card, and you just want to see if some of these people are going to take that step forward. We already know like a Tiffany Stratton can do that. Obviously Carmelo Hayes, they're positioning him in a really big spot, especially if they're going to put him with Cody right away in that match. They're going to, kind of put him in a very featured spot, I think, moving forward. So, like I said, you've got a lot of talent who are really trying to kind of take that step into being the next top stars. And I think you could really identify as I'm looking at this roster, I think there are three people 100%. That's Jade, that's Carmelo Hayes, Tiffany Stratton. Like all three of those, putting them in, I mean, really, you could even say the Bloodline too, right? Like Solo getting a chance to now shine too. So I think that's what's interesting and different about SmackDown than it is on Raw. You've got some people that are getting thrust into those sort of main event tier roles and seeing how they thrive in those. And so, I think that's, at least something coming out of this for SmackDown. But I do think Raw probably won this draft. But again, that may just be because of the numbers. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. What did you think? Who is your winners and losers from the Raw and SmackDown brands here? Moving forward, like I said, I thought I brought up some people who have a chance to really shine now moving forward. Some of the NXT call-ups, all of them are going to get an opportunity, on these different brands to kind of have see what kind of storylines that WWE puts them into. And then we see how all these kind of new storylines maybe push forward. Even though you have a lot of people on the same brands that they're already on, you did have some movement, like we said, whether it's from factions, tag teams, and such. So let me know your biggest winners and losers. Who won? Was it Raw, SmackDown? Who won this draft? And give me your thoughts on this draft as a whole. But as always, guys, I appreciate you watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out. Still trying to get back to my normal routine here. Still having, like I said, my voice is still not all the way back yet, but doing my best. So we will catch up on some stuff we've gotten behind on here on the channel. And of course, Backlash coming up this weekend. We're going to do our best to do a live Backlash reaction show. Hadn't been able to do those for Raw and SmackDown over the past week and a half because I just not been able to talk as well. So yeah, we're going to keep doing that. But again, I appreciate you guys watching. Give me your thoughts. Who were the winners and losers from the 2024 WWE Draft?